part of what we're going to do right now is we're going to talk about educational advocacy, your role as a CASA in educational advocacy for your children. And during the course of the discussion, we're going to talk about the facts and figures, why advocate, some of the symptoms, your role, some of the types of advocacy, and then after we're finished, again, we'll have questions and answers. I want to start with some startling facts and figures. Number one, about 800,000 children are served during the year in foster care systems. More startling is that each of these children lose 4 to 6 months of educational skills every time they change schools. And most children in foster care between kindergarten and the time they graduate from high school have changed schools 6 times. So think about all these children have lost during all of these transitions in their life. So why do we advocate for these kids? These kids are vulnerable. They don't have a lot of people looking out for them. They've had a lot of disruptions in their life. They've been pulled out of the home, or they have people coming into the home taking care of them and overseeing their family. A lot of them have missed school days. They have very little oversight to their homework. A lot of these parents have enough problems that helping their kids with their homework is the least thing on their mind. So these kids have kind of been floating through school, trying to get by the best way that they know how. Some of the symptoms, and this is important because kids aren't going to walk up to you and say, hey, I'm having problems in school, help me out. They're going to be a lot more reticent to share that with you. So you really have to pay attention to what's going on in their lives. Attendance problems are a good sign that there's a problem, or poor grades. I mean, a lot of times you get to know these kids and they're really bright kids, but they're getting D's and F's. Why is that? The child is complaining, I'm just stupid, I can't get this, I just don't know, I'm just stupid. And a lot of these kids have very poor self-image, and so they will tell you these kinds of things. The foster parent is saying, this child just won't, I can't get him up, I can't get him to go to school, they fight me every morning. All of these kinds of things are indications that something may be wrong in the school setting. The child's not comfortable in some way and they're crying out for help. They want somebody to help them out. So what can you as a CASA do? Well, your role as a CASA is to help ensure that this child has the best educational experience possible. And part of the way that you do that is the way that you go about your normal everyday CASA work. You're going to gather information. So you're going to be asking a lot of questions of a lot of different people. You're going to listen to the answers. You're going to help figure out what the problems are. You're going to propose solutions. And you're going to monitor the progress. And if that doesn't sound just like your role as a CASA, it's just a little minicosm of your CASA role. It happens to be focused on education. So how do you get started when you're trying to advocate for your child or your children? The first and one of the most important things to do is to talk to the child. And you want to talk to the child about a couple of things. Number one, you want to talk to them about what's going on in school. But number two, you want to let your child or your children know that you will be talking directly to the school. These children have a lot of invasions of privacy, and they feel, depending upon their ages, they feel like their privacy is being invaded. So it is very important that you be very clear and upfront with them and help them understand why you need to talk to the school so you can help them and guide them. So the first and most important thing is to talk to your child and make sure your child understands what you're going to be doing. Then you need to talk to the foster parents, the caseworker, the parents, depending upon the involvement of the parents. And again, explain your role as a CASA, explain that you will be talking to the school and gathering information to help you provide the best support of the child. Then you want to contact the school. And in many instances, the first place you're going to go is to the principal's office and introduce yourself to the school. I don't know if they've talked about your court order and your acceptance at this point in time, but when you become a CASA, you will, and you take a case, there'll be a court order and there'll be an acceptance where you sign saying that you accept this case. And these papers authorize you to ask questions about the children. And so because of privacy, any person that you approach asking questions about your child, you're going to have to give them the paperwork so that they know that you actually do have access to that information. You'll start with the principal's office. Most times you're not going to actually speak to the principal. They're going to refer you to the appropriate area in the school. It might be a guidance counselor, it might be a teacher, it might be a vice principal. But you should introduce yourself in the school. And then you want to start forming relationships with the people that are important to these children within the school. You want to call the teachers, you want to talk to coaches if they're involved in sports and those types of things. So that's kind of the way that you get started. There are two types of advocacy. There's informal advocacy, which you as a CASA can do on your own without any support from anyone else. And this is done routinely by checking up on their grades, checking what their test scores are, talking to the teachers or the guidance counselor about how the child's doing in school. The other kind is formal advocacy. You've heard about 501 plans and those kinds of things, 504 plans. That's formal advocacy. And you as a CASA cannot initiate formal advocacy. You must go through the social worker or the parent or the legal guardian of the child or children in order to initiate legal advocacy. It is really important to remember you are not in a position to initiate that kind of advocacy. So where you're going to spend most of your time is with the informal advocacy. There are lots of informal ways that you can help a student or a child that you're advocating for. And a lot of times when children are having problems in school, again, part of it is because they haven't had anyone who's been helping them through their homework or that type of thing. So if the child's still at home or if they're in a foster family that has a lot of foster children, a lot of times you can ask the school to monitor how the child's doing with their homework and those kinds of things. You can work with the foster family to help set up schedules or reward systems for improving grades and doing your homework and that type of thing. You can make sure the child has rides to and from school. All of these things are really important because what they do is they provide the support for the child that allows the child to focus on what they need to be doing, which is learning in school. And a lot of these children, again, have not had this kind of support in the past. So it's important for them to know that that's there for them. Again, the formal advocacy are the IDEAs, the 504 plans, and those types of things. You have to have the involvement of a parent or a legal guardian or the caseworker. There's lots of forms and those kinds of things. When you're dealing with educational advocacy, there are hurdles that you may encounter. There are lots and lots of wonderful schools, teachers, guidance counselors, and everything out there. But on occasion, you're going to run into the school or the guidance counselor or the teacher who is resistant to having someone step in and say, I've identified a problem. It could be that they've got inaccurate information or they're giving you inaccurate information. This child is not eligible for services because he or she is passing. The child might have an incredible IQ, but because they're not failing the system, you might be told, we're sorry, we can't help this child. So you can work around that in informal ways. It may be that the child has a disability and they want to funnel them into some kind of special class, and maybe the child would be better off, or you feel the child would be better off mainstreamed. You can work with the teachers and talk to them about that. One of the issues that you're going to probably run into the most is when you're dealing with schools, the documentation, particularly as we talked earlier, these kids change schools. And a lot of times the documentation does not get from one school to another very quickly. And in some cases, kids can be sitting at home for 2 weeks during a school year because they've had to transfer schools during the year and the paperwork did not get from one school to the other. They're out of the one school and the other school won't take them in. So it's finding that what a problem is and then getting the right person. You don't have a right to go and get those papers and carry them from one school to the other, but you can work with the social worker or whomever to help get those things done. So there's a lot of issues around paperwork, but you do want to find out and you do want to talk to the schools. You want to get copies of report cards. You want to get copies of tests and grades and those kinds of things, because those really help you figure out how the child's doing. And you have access to all of that information as a court-appointed special advocate. The key players that you're going to be dealing with are principals, teachers, nurses, counselors, and IEP teams. And then on your side, you have a lot of other people who are advocating for the child that you also want to coordinate with. And it's important to keep that in mind, because the foster parents or the parents may want to be actively involved. You have a guardian ad litem who is also talking to the schools and talking to the child. You have the social worker. You may have a case manager. So it's important to understand that all of these people are also talking to the school. And as you have ideas or you have concerns, you should be coordinating, particularly with the GAL and the social worker. Now, I'm sure this has been brought up to you before, but as a CASA, you are to be gathering information. And so when you're talking to the teachers or you're talking to the principals, it is not our role to tell them why the child's in foster care, what's happened in the child's life. We are gathering the information from them. The only two people in the case that we're really sharing information with would be the social worker and the guardian ad litem. And so it is also important, as you're dealing with the school system, to explain your role and to explain that you're going to be gathering information, and to be very nice but firm when they ask you more information about the child. It is not your role to disclose that information. There are lots of resources, and I believe that you have those in your book that you can go to. There are online websites for advocating for children in the educational system. So there are a lot of resources that are available to you and are helpful in supporting your advocacy for the children. And with that, I think we're going to move to a panel discussion.
Your slide suggested that a child could attend up to 6 different schools. Does the court order that we get, does that give us the ability to go back to these other schools? And if they are out-of-state schools, will those out-of-state schools recognize a Virginia court order?
Theoretically and ideally, the records will follow the child. Each time he or she moves from one school to the next, the records should follow. So by the time he gets to the school he is attending now, where you're beginning to work with this case, all of the records should be there. Sometimes they are not. And all that you can do in that situation is persevere with the school to follow up and make sure they get the records. As far as going to another school, if you've examined all those records and you have questions that the personnel at the current school cannot answer, you can certainly do that. You can certainly do that. I'm not entirely certain that another state would recognize a Virginia court order, but I think you know, if it's a neighboring state, you could probably make those arrangements.
Yes.
A follow-up on the records. Are most of these things online, or are they still operating paper systems?
Most of them you're still going to have a folder, a paper folder. Individual records are not usually kept online because of privacy concerns.